I remember the first time I felt invisible in my own home. It was not a dramatic moment. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just a quiet erasure that happened so slowly I almost did not notice it myself. My son stood in the kitchen that evening with his arm around her shoulders. His wife. The woman I had welcomed into our family with open arms and an open heart. I had been speaking about something simple. Perhaps it was about the upcoming family gathering or maybe a concern about the leaking roof. I cannot recall the exact words now. But I remember his response clearly. He looked at me with that patient smile. The kind you give to someone whose opinion no longer holds weight. And then he turned to her and asked what she thought instead. That was the moment I realized something had shifted. My words had become background noise in a home I had built with my own hands and heart. He defended her in ways I had never seen him defend anyone before. Not even himself. It was as if every concern I raised was an attack he needed to shield her from. Every question I asked was treated like an accusation. I watched him transform from the boy who used to seek my advice on everything to a man who saw me as the problem. And she stood beside him. Quiet. Gentle. Always appearing so understanding. Always playing the role of the wounded one who needed protection. I told myself I was overthinking it. That this was just the natural way of things. A man prioritizes his wife. A mother steps back. I had raised him to be loyal and he was being exactly that. But loyalty should not feel like betrayal. I began to notice how carefully she crafted every moment. How she would wait until I said something and then softly offer a different perspective. Not aggressively. Never in a way that looked manipulative. Just enough to make him question me. Just enough to plant doubt. If I suggested we keep the windows open for fresh air, she would mention her sensitivity to pollen. If I recommended a family recipe, she would gently say it was too heavy for her digestion. If I brought up a concern about finances, she would look hurt and say she felt judged. And every single time my son would turn to me with that look. That look that said I was being unreasonable. That I was the one causing tension. I started to second-guess everything I said. I weighed each word before speaking. I softened my tone. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I swallowed my concerns and told myself that peace was more important than being right. But peace built on silence is not peace at all. It is surrender. There were moments when I caught glimpses of something underneath her gentle exterior. A flash of coldness in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. A smirk that disappeared the moment my son turned around. A tone that changed depending on who was in the room. But I had no proof. Only instincts. And instincts are not enough when someone has already decided you are the villain in their story. I watched my son build a shield around her. A shield made of his trust and his love and his absolute belief that she could do no wrong. And that shield kept me out. It kept the truth out. It kept reality itself out. He stopped visiting me as often. When he did come by, she was always with him. Always present. Always listening. I could never speak to him alone. Every conversation was monitored. Every moment was controlled. I felt like a stranger in my own son's life. Family gatherings became performances. She would laugh at the right moments. Compliment everyone. Bring thoughtful gifts. Help with the dishes. Play the role of the perfect daughter-in-law so convincingly that I started to wonder if I was the one imagining things. Maybe I was jealous. Maybe I was one of those mothers who could not let go. Maybe I was the problem after all. But deep down I knew better. A mother knows. Even when she cannot explain it. Even when she has no evidence. Even when the whole world tells her she is wrong. A mother knows. I saw how she slowly distanced him from the rest of the family. It was subtle. She never said do not visit your mother or do not talk to your sister. She simply made it inconvenient. She scheduled things on family event days. She created emergencies that required his attention. She made herself the center of his world so completely that everyone else became optional. And he let it happen. Because he believed he was protecting her. Because he thought he was being a good husband. Because he trusted her more than he trusted his own instincts. I tried to talk to him once. Just once. I chose my words carefully. I told him I felt like we were drifting apart. I said I missed him. I asked if everything was okay. He looked uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat. And then she touched his hand. Just a light touch. Nothing dramatic. But it was enough. He told me everything was fine. He said I was worrying too much. He suggested I was having a hard time adjusting to him being married. He used her words. I could hear her voice in his responses, and I realized I had already lost him. Not to love, but to manipulation disguised as love. I left that conversation feeling hollow. I smiled. I hugged him. I told him I understood. But inside I was screaming. How do you save someone who does not want to be saved? How do you open the eyes of someone who refuses to see? I went home that night and cried. Not loud, painful sobs. Just quiet tears that came from a place deeper than sadness. A place where grief and helplessness lived together. I had spent years raising him, teaching him right from wrong, showing him how to recognize honesty and integrity. And yet here he was defending someone who was slowly eroding everything I had tried to build in him. But I also knew that pushing harder would only push him further away. So I made a decision that night. A decision that felt like giving up but was actually the opposite. I decided to step back. Not because I did not care, but because I cared too much to become the enemy in his story. I would let time and truth do what my words could not. There is a special kind of pain that comes with choosing silence. It is not the silence of indifference. It is the silence of restraint. The silence of a mother who knows that speaking will only make things worse. I had always been the kind of person who addressed problems directly. I did not believe in letting things fester. I believed in honest conversations and clear boundaries. But this situation required a different approach. So I became quieter. I stopped offering advice unless asked. I stopped voicing concerns. I stopped trying to compete for my son's attention. I let her have the space she was taking anyway. And I watched. I watched how she controlled conversations without seeming controlling. How she redirected his attention whenever it drifted toward me or anyone else in the family. How she carefully constructed a version of reality where she was always the victim and everyone else was against her. She was brilliant at it. I had to give her that. She never overplayed her hand. She never made it obvious. She played the long game with patience and precision. I thought back to the beginning. To the day my son first introduced her to me. She had seemed so sweet. So genuine. She smiled warmly. She asked questions about our family. She complimented my home. She offered to help with dinner. Everything about her seemed perfect. Maybe too perfect. But I ignored that small voice in the back of my mind. The one that whispered something is not right here. I told myself I was being unfair. That I was judging her too harshly. That I should give her a chance. And I did. I gave her every chance. I welcomed her into our lives. I treated her like my own daughter. I included her in family traditions. I supported their relationship. I celebrated their wedding with genuine joy. I wanted to love her. I tried to love her. And for a while I thought I did. But love built on pretense crumbles eventually. The signs were always there. Small things that seemed insignificant at the time but now made perfect sense. The way she would agree with me in private but present a different opinion in front of my son. The way she would create small misunderstandings and then position herself as the peacemaker. The way she kept track of every little thing I said or did and used it later to paint me in a negative light. I remember one afternoon I had made her favorite dessert. Or at least what she had told me was her favorite. I spent hours in the kitchen preparing it perfectly. When she arrived she smiled and thanked me. She took a bite and said it was delicious. But later that evening I overheard her telling my son that I had made something she specifically told me she could not eat. That she had mentioned her dietary restrictions multiple times but I never listened. That she felt disrespected. I stood outside the door listening to my son apologize to her on my behalf. Listening to him promise he would talk to me about being more considerate. And I said nothing. Because what could I say? It would be my word against hers. And I already knew whose word he would believe. That was when I truly understood what I was dealing with. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a personality clash. This was calculated. This was intentional. This was someone who had studied the dynamics of our family and knew exactly how to dismantle them. But why? That was the question that haunted me. What did she gain from turning my son against me? What was the purpose of isolating him from his family? What was she protecting or hiding that required such elaborate manipulation? I did not have answers yet. But I knew they would come eventually. Lies always unravel. The truth always surfaces. It is just a matter of time. So I waited. I continued to show up for family gatherings. I continued to be kind to her. I continued to love my son from a distance. I did not fight. I did not argue. I did not create drama. I simply existed in the background. Patient. Observant. Heartbroken but not broken. My daughter noticed before anyone else. She pulled me aside one day and asked if I was okay. She said I seemed different. Quieter. Sadder. I told her I was fine. That I was just adjusting to changes. That everything was okay. She did not believe me. I could see it in her eyes. But she did not push. She just hugged me and told me she was there if I needed to talk. I appreciated that more than she knew. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if I was doing the right thing. Wondering if my silence made me complicit. Wondering if I should fight harder for my son even if it meant losing him completely. But I kept coming back to the same conclusion. Some battles cannot be won with force. Some truths cannot be spoken into existence. Some people have to discover reality on their own. And my son needed to see her true face without my interference. Because if I exposed her and he was not ready to believe it, he would only resent me more. He would see me as the bitter mother-in-law who could not accept his happiness. He would cut me out of his life completely to protect her. But if he discovered the truth himself, if he saw her lies with his own eyes, if he experienced her manipulation firsthand, then he would understand. Then he would come back. Not because I forced him, but because the truth forced him. So I built my own kind of shield. Not around her, but around my own heart. I protected myself from the pain of his rejection by accepting it as temporary. I shielded myself from bitterness by choosing faith over anger. I defended my peace by refusing to engage in games I could not win. And I prayed. Not for revenge. Not for her downfall. But for truth. For clarity. For my son's eyes to open before it was too late. I prayed for patience. For strength. For wisdom to know when to speak and when to stay silent. And mostly I prayed for the day when my son would come back to me. Not as the blind man who chose her over everyone else, but as the man who finally understood what real love looked like. That day felt far away. Sometimes impossibly far. But I held on to hope anyway. Because hope is all a mother has when her child is lost. The cracks started small. So small that at first I thought I was imagining them. It began with little inconsistencies. Things that did not quite add up. Stories that changed slightly each time they were told. She mentioned visiting a friend one afternoon, but my son later said she had been at a work event. She talked about a colleague's promotion but used a name my son did not recognize when he asked about it later. She said she needed money for a family emergency, but her family seemed fine when I casually asked about them at a gathering. Individually, these things meant nothing. They were easy to dismiss as simple miscommunication or forgetfulness. But together they formed a pattern. A pattern of deception. I did not go looking for it. I was not spying or investigating. I was simply paying attention. And once you start paying attention, it becomes hard to unsee what is right in front of you. My son started to look tired. Not physically exhausted, but emotionally drained. There was a heaviness in his eyes that had not been there before. A tension in his shoulders. A distance in his smile. He laughed less. He seemed distracted. He checked his phone constantly with an expression that looked more like anxiety than anticipation. Something was weighing on him. But whenever I asked if he was okay, he said everything was fine. Always fine. Always perfect. Always exactly what he wanted. But his eyes told a different story. I noticed she had become more controlling. Not in obvious ways, but in small adjustments that tightened her grip on his life. She needed to know where he was at all times. She called multiple times a day. She questioned him about conversations he had with other people. She made comments about his friends that slowly pushed them away. She created reasons why he could not attend family events or spend time with anyone outside their bubble. And he complied. Because he thought he was being a considerate husband. Because she framed it all as concern and love. Because she made him believe that prioritizing her needs was the same as being committed to their marriage. I saw my son disappearing into a life that looked nothing like the one he had imagined for himself. There was an afternoon when he came to visit me alone. A rare occurrence. She had some appointment she could not miss. For a brief moment I thought we might finally talk. Really talk. We sat in the living room drinking coffee. The same room where I had rocked him to sleep as a baby. The same room where he had told me about his dreams and fears growing up. The same room that now felt miles away from who we used to be. I asked him about work. He gave short answers. I asked about his plans for the future. He shrugged. I asked if he was happy. He paused. That pause said everything. But before he could answer, his phone rang. It was her. He excused himself and stepped outside to take the call. When he came back in 15 minutes later, his face looked different. Guarded. Careful. He said he had to leave. Something had come up. He hugged me quickly and left. I stood at the window watching him drive away, and I felt that familiar ache in my chest. The ache of knowing your child is hurting but being powerless to help them. That was when I started noticing the financial changes. My son had always been responsible with money. He saved. He planned. He was careful and thoughtful about spending. But suddenly there were signs of strain. He mentioned needing to pick up extra shifts at work. He postponed replacing his car even though it was breaking down constantly. He declined invitations to family dinners, saying money was tight. But her lifestyle had not changed at all. She still bought new clothes regularly. She still went out for expensive lunches. She still talked about spa days and weekend trips. Where was the money going? I did not ask. I knew better than to voice financial concerns. That would only make me look like the meddling mother-in-law who could not mind her own business. But I worried. Constantly. Then came the day my daughter told me something that made my blood run cold. She had run into an old friend who worked at a bank. They had gotten to talking, and the friend mentioned seeing my son's wife at the branch frequently. Making large withdrawals. Transferring money to accounts that were not joint accounts. My daughter had not thought much of it at the time. But when she mentioned it to me casually, something clicked into place. She was hiding money. Not their money. His money. She was taking it and putting it somewhere he did not have access to. I felt sick. This was not just manipulation anymore. This was theft. This was planning. This was someone preparing for something. But preparing for what? I could not accuse her without proof. I could not tell my son without evidence. And even if I had evidence, would he believe me? Or would he find some way to justify it? To explain it away? To defend her once again? I felt trapped. Helpless. Furious. But I still waited. Because I knew that if she was hiding money, there was a reason. And that reason would eventually reveal itself. Around this same time, I started hearing things. Small comments from mutual friends. Observations from family members. Questions about whether my son and his wife were having problems. People had noticed changes too. They saw what I saw. But like me, they did not know what to do about it. One cousin mentioned that she had seen my son's wife having lunch with a man. Not in a group. Just the two of them. Looking very comfortable. Very familiar. My cousin had not wanted to spread rumors but felt I should know. My heart sank. An affair. That was the missing piece. Everything made sense now. The secrecy. The financial hiding. The increased control over my son's time and attention. The lies. She was not just manipulating him. She was betraying him. And she was making sure she had everything in place for when it all fell apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake my son awake. I wanted to drag the truth into the light and make him see what was happening right in front of him. But I knew I could not be the one to tell him. If I told him, he would think I was lying. He would think I was trying to sabotage his marriage out of jealousy. He would cut me off completely and run straight to her for comfort. And she would use my accusations to bind him even tighter to her. No. I could not be the messenger. But I could make sure the truth found its way to him. I started paying closer attention to patterns. When did she say she was working late? When did she claim to have appointments? When did she need time away from home? I did not follow her. I did not hire anyone to investigate. I simply waited for her to make a mistake. Because people who live double lives always make mistakes eventually. They get comfortable. They get careless. They forget a detail. They slip up. And when she did, I needed to make sure my son was in a position to see it for himself. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. There was a family event. A birthday party for a relative. My son and his wife had confirmed they would attend. But 2 days before the party, she told my son she could not go. A work emergency. Something urgent that required her immediate attention. My son looked disappointed but understanding. He offered to skip the party too so she would not be alone. But she insisted he go. Said she did not want him to miss family time because of her work. Said she would be fine. He agreed. The night of the party he seemed distracted. Checking his phone. Texting her. Making sure she was okay. I watched him carefully. I saw the worry in his eyes. The guilt of enjoying himself while she was supposedly working hard. And then I saw something else. One of the younger cousins was scrolling through social media and suddenly looked confused. She showed her phone to her sister. They whispered. They looked over at my son. I walked over casually and asked what they were looking at. They hesitated. Then they showed me. It was a photo. Posted just 30 minutes earlier. Tagged at a restaurant downtown. And there she was. My son's wife. Laughing. Dressed beautifully. Sitting across from a man I did not recognize. The caption read something about celebrating good news. My heart pounded. This was it. This was the moment. I looked over at my son. He was still texting her. Still completely unaware. I had a choice to make. I could show him the photo right now in front of everyone. Expose her publicly. Watch his world shatter in real time. Or I could wait. Let him discover it on his own. Give him the dignity of processing this privately. Every instinct screamed at me to show him immediately. To end this nightmare once and for all. But I took a breath. And I waited. Because this was not about me. This was about him. And he deserved to come to the truth in a way that did not destroy him completely. So I said nothing. I simply planted a seed. I casually mentioned to my son that a few of the younger cousins were talking about a nice restaurant downtown. Asked if he had ever been there. Said it looked lovely in photos. He looked interested. Asked which restaurant. I told him. He nodded. Said maybe he and his wife could check it out sometime. And then I watched as the seed took root. The next few days felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. I did not know exactly what happened. But I knew something had shifted. My son stopped by unexpectedly one afternoon. His face looked pale. His hands were shaking slightly. He asked if we could talk. I made tea. We sat down. And I waited. He did not speak for a long time. He just stared at his cup. His jaw clenched. His eyes red. Finally he said her name. Just her name. And his voice broke. I reached across the table and took his hand. He told me he had started to notice things. Small things at first. Then bigger things. Inconsistencies. Lies. Unexplained absences. He said he had tried to ignore it. Tried to trust her. Tried to believe there were reasonable explanations. But then he had checked their bank accounts. And seen the transfers. The withdrawals. The money moving into accounts he did not recognize. He had confronted her gently. Asked her about it. She had gotten defensive. Accused him of not trusting her. Turned it around and made him feel guilty for even asking. But he could not let it go. So he had started paying attention. Really paying attention. And that night of the family party. He had gone home early. Told her he was not feeling well. And when he walked into their house he found her getting ready to go out. Dressed up. Makeup done. Not for work. For something else. She had been startled to see him. Made up an excuse about a last-minute dinner with colleagues. But he had seen her phone light up on the counter. A text message. From someone named Marcus. Saying he was looking forward to seeing her tonight. His voice cracked as he told me this. He said he had asked her who Marcus was. She said a coworker. Just a coworker. But something in her eyes told him she was lying. So for the first time in their entire relationship he did something he never thought he would do. He checked her phone while she was in the shower. And he found everything. Months of messages. Flirtatious. Intimate. Planning meetups. Talking about a future together. Complaining about my son. Calling him naive. Saying he was easy to control. There were photos. Videos. Evidence of a relationship that had been going on for nearly a year. And worse. There were messages about money. About moving funds. About making sure she had enough saved up for when she left him. She had been planning her exit while pretending to build a life with him. My son looked at me with eyes full of pain and humiliation and rage. He said he had confronted her with the evidence. She had tried to deny it at first. Then she had tried to minimize it. Said it was not serious. Said she had been confused. Said my son had been distant and she felt lonely. She blamed him. Even caught red-handed, she blamed him. He told her to leave. She refused. Said it was her home too. Said she had rights. They had spent the last 2 days in agonizing silence. Her acting like nothing was wrong. Him trying to figure out what to do next. And now he was here. Broken. Lost. Looking for answers I did not have. I held his hand tighter. I did not say I told you so. I did not say I knew something was wrong. I did not make this about me being right. I just listened. Because that was what he needed. Not judgment. Not lectures. Just his mother. Present. Steady. Still loving him even when he could not love himself. He apologized. Over and over. He said he should have listened to me. Should have seen the signs. Should have trusted his instincts. He said he had been so determined to prove everyone wrong. So determined to show that his marriage was strong. So determined to be the loyal husband that he had ignored every red flag. He had built a shield around her. And in doing so he had locked himself in a prison of lies. I told him this was not his fault. That manipulation works because it is designed to work. That loving someone does not make you stupid. It makes you human. I told him he did nothing wrong by trusting his wife. The wrong was hers. Not his. He cried. And I held him the way I had when he was a little boy. The way mothers hold their children when the world breaks their heart. We sat there for hours. Talking. Processing. Grieving the death of the life he thought he had. Eventually he asked me what he should do. I told him the truth. That he needed to protect himself legally. That he needed to secure his finances. That he needed to document everything. That he needed to get a lawyer. And that he needed to remove her from his life completely. Not out of revenge. But out of self-preservation. Because someone who could lie and steal and betray him so thoroughly was not someone who would suddenly become honest and kind. She had shown him who she was. And he needed to believe her. He nodded slowly. Absorbing it all. Before he left he hugged me tightly. And he whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for not pushing. Thank you for not fighting. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for still being here." And in that moment all the pain and silence and heartbreak of the past months felt worth it. Because my son was back. Not the version of him she had created. But the real him. Broken. But ready to heal. The days that followed were brutal. My son moved back home temporarily while he sorted out the legal aspects of separating his life from hers. She did not go quietly. She called constantly. Sent long text messages filled with apologies and excuses and promises to change. She showed up at his workplace. She reached out to mutual friends trying to control the narrative. She painted herself as the victim. Said my son was cruel and unforgiving. Said he was abandoning her over a misunderstanding. Said his family had poisoned him against her. Some people believed her. Some people took her side. Some people thought my son was overreacting. But the people who mattered knew the truth. And my son stood firm. It was not easy. There were moments when he doubted himself. Moments when her tears and pleas almost broke through his resolve. But he remembered the messages. The lies. The theft. The betrayal. And he remembered that love is not supposed to feel like manipulation. His lawyer was efficient. The evidence was overwhelming. She had no legal ground to stand on. Within weeks the process was moving forward. Assets were being separated. Accounts were being closed. Ties were being cut. She fought it. Tried to delay. Tried to negotiate. Tried to take more than she deserved. But my son had learned his lesson. He did not negotiate with liars. Through it all I stayed close. Not hovering. Not controlling. Just present. I cooked meals he barely touched. I sat with him during sleepless nights. I listened when he needed to talk and stayed quiet when he needed silence. I watched him grieve. Not just the end of his marriage. But the loss of the person he thought she was. The future he had imagined. The trust he had given so freely. Grief is not linear. Some days he was angry. Some days he was sad. Some days he was numb. But slowly, very slowly, he started to heal. He reconnected with friends he had distanced himself from. He started going out again. He laughed. Real genuine laughter. He began to look like himself again. One evening we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset. He turned to me and said something I will never forget. He said he understood now why I had stayed silent. That if I had pushed, he would have pushed back harder. That if I had attacked her, he would have defended her more fiercely. That if I had forced him to choose, he would have chosen wrong. But by stepping back, I had given him the space to see the truth on his own. And that made all the difference. He said he was sorry. Sorry for the ways he had dismissed me. Sorry for the times he had made me feel small. Sorry for choosing her words over mine. I told him there was nothing to forgive. That he had been doing what he thought was right. That loyalty is a beautiful thing even when it is misplaced. That I had never stopped loving him even when he could not see it. He asked me how I had stayed so calm. How I had not given up on him. I told him the truth. That giving up was never an option. That he is my son. And a mother's love does not have conditions. I loved him when he was wrong. I loved him when he could not love me back. I loved him through the silence and the distance and the pain. Because that is what love is. Not the easy moments. But the hard ones. The ones that test you. The ones that require you to trust in something bigger than your hurt. We sat in comfortable silence after that. The kind of silence that exists between people who understand each other completely. And I felt peace. Real deep, unshakable peace. Not because everything was perfect. But because we had survived. We had come through the fire. And we were still standing. Months passed. The divorce was finalized. She moved out of state. My son heard through mutual acquaintances that she had moved in with Marcus. The man from the messages. He felt nothing when he heard that. No anger. No sadness. Just indifference. And that was how he knew he was truly free. He threw himself into rebuilding his life. He advanced in his career. He traveled. He rediscovered hobbies he had abandoned. He invested in friendships. And he spent time with family. Real quality time. He showed up for dinners. He called just to talk. He asked for my advice again. Not because he had to. But because he wanted to. Our relationship was different now. Stronger. Built on a foundation of mutual respect and hard-won understanding. He was more cautious with his heart. More aware of red flags. More willing to trust his instincts. But he was not closed off. He had not let her betrayal turn him bitter. He had learned. And learning is not the same as hardening. There was an afternoon when he brought someone new to meet me. A woman he had been seeing for a few months. I will admit I was nervous. Protective. Worried history might repeat itself. But within minutes of meeting her, I knew she was different. She was genuine. Confident without being arrogant. Kind without being performative. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers. She did not try too hard. She did not perform. She was simply herself. And my son looked at her the way he used to look at the world. With openness. With joy. With hope. After she left, he asked me what I thought. I smiled. And I told him the truth. That she seemed wonderful. That I could see why he cared for her. That I was happy for him. But more importantly, I told him to trust himself. That he knew what real love looked like now. That he had the wisdom to recognize the difference between someone who loved him and someone who loved what he could give them. He nodded. And I saw confidence in his eyes. He had survived the worst. And it had made him better. Wiser. Stronger. Not in a way that made him hard. But in a way that made him whole. Looking back now, I understand why everything had to happen the way it did. If I had forced the issue earlier, he would not have learned the lesson he needed to learn. If I had exposed her before he was ready, he would have resented me instead of her. If I had fought harder, I would have lost him completely. Sometimes love means stepping back. Letting people make their own mistakes. Trusting that the truth will surface even when you cannot force it into the light. It is the hardest thing a mother can do. Watching your child suffer. Knowing you could end it with a single conversation. But understanding that doing so would rob them of the growth they need. I do not regret my silence. I do not regret the patience. I do not regret the pain. Because all of it brought us here. To this place of healing and honesty and hope. My son is happy now. Truly happy. Not the kind of happiness that requires convincing. But the quiet, steady kind that comes from living authentically. And I am at peace. Not because everything turned out perfectly. But because I know I did right by my son even when it cost me everything. I protected his future by refusing to control his present. I preserved our relationship by being willing to lose it temporarily. I honored his journey by not forcing him down a path he was not ready to walk. That is what real love does. It waits. It trusts. It endures. And in the end it always wins. Not because it fights the hardest, but because it never stops believing in the person it loves. My son came back to me. Not because I demanded it, but because when he was ready he knew where to find me. Standing exactly where I had always been. With open arms. With unconditional love. With a heart that never gave up on him. And that is the greatest victory of all. There are moments now when I catch myself smiling at memories that once brought me pain. The silent dinners. The awkward gatherings. The feeling of being invisible in my own son's life. They no longer sting the way they used to. Because I know now that they were not the end of the story. They were just difficult chapters in a much longer book. A book about resilience. About faith. About the kind of love that does not need to be loud to be powerful. I think about other mothers who might be going through something similar. Watching their children be manipulated. Feeling helpless. Wondering if they should speak up or stay silent. And I want to tell them what I learned. That you cannot force someone to see the truth. You can only create space for them to discover it themselves. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Not because you do not care, but because you care so much that you are willing to wait. That silence is not weakness. It is strategy. It is strength. It is the long game that manipulators never see coming. Because they expect you to fight. They expect you to react. They expect you to become the villain in their narrative. But when you refuse to play that role, when you remain calm and patient and loving, you take away their greatest weapon. And eventually the truth reveals itself. Not because you forced it, but because lies cannot survive in the presence of steady, unwavering truth. My son tells people now about what happened. Not with bitterness, but with perspective. He talks about how he was manipulated, how he missed the signs, how his mother never gave up on him even when he gave up on her. And every time he tells the story he ends it the same way. He says his mother saved him by doing nothing. That her silence was the loudest love he has ever known. I do not think of myself as a hero. I was just a mother doing what mothers do. Loving her child. Protecting him in the only way that would actually work. But if my story can help someone else, if it can give another mother hope, if it can show that patience is not passivity, then it was all worth it. Because we need more stories about the quiet victories. The battles won through endurance rather than aggression. The love that does not need to prove itself because it simply exists. That kind of love is rare. It is hard. It requires sacrificing your pride and your need to be right and your desire for immediate resolution. But it is the kind of love that changes lives. Not just the life of the person you are loving, but your own life too. Because when you learn to love without conditions, without expectations, without needing anything in return, you become free. Free from the need to control. Free from the fear of loss. Free from the burden of resentment. You become someone who can weather any storm. Because you know that love is not about holding on. It is about being willing to let go and trust that what is meant to stay will return. My son is building a new life now. A life based on honesty and self-respect and genuine connection. He has become the man I always knew he could be. Not because I forced him into that shape, but because I gave him the space to find it himself. And our relationship is deeper now than it has ever been. Not because we pretend the painful years did not happen, but because we acknowledge them. We honor them. We recognize that they were necessary for us to arrive here. He thanks me often, more than he needs to. But I do not need thanks. I do not need recognition. I do not need validation. I have something better. I have my son back. Whole. Healed. Happy. I have peace in my heart knowing I did not become the villain in his story even when it would have been easier to fight. I have the satisfaction of knowing that truth won. Not because I wielded it like a weapon, but because I trusted it to do its work in its own time. And I have the wisdom that comes from surviving something that almost broke me but did not. That wisdom is a gift. One I will carry with me for the rest of my life. It taught me that strength is not always loud. That love is not always visible. That sometimes the greatest act of courage is to do nothing and trust that everything will be okay. It taught me that being right is not as important as being kind. That winning an argument is not as valuable as preserving a relationship. That immediate satisfaction is not as fulfilling as long-term peace. And it taught me that a mother's love is the most powerful force in the world. Not because it demands, but because it endures. Through the lies, through the manipulation, through the heartbreak and the silence and the unbearable waiting. A mother's love endures. And in the end it always brings her children home. I look at my life now and I feel grateful. Not for the pain, but for what the pain produced. Depth, understanding, compassion, strength. I am not the same woman I was before all of this happened. I am better. Not because I suffered, but because I chose how to respond to suffering. I chose patience over anger. I chose silence over conflict. I chose faith over fear. And those choices shaped me into someone I am proud to be. Someone who does not need to prove her worth. Someone who does not need to control outcomes. Someone who trusts in the process even when it is painful. My son is thriving. My family is whole. My heart is at peace. And the woman who tried to destroy all of that is gone. Not because I fought her, but because the truth fought for me. That is the power of integrity. The power of patience. The power of love that does not waver even when it is tested beyond measure. I share this story not to boast, but to encourage. To remind mothers everywhere that you are stronger than you know. That your love is more powerful than any manipulation. That your patience will be rewarded even when it feels like giving up. Hold on. Stay steady. Trust the process. Your children will come back to you. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But eventually. Because real love always finds its way home. And when it does, you will be standing there. Right where you have always been. With open arms. With a forgiving heart. With a love that never gave up. That is the kind of love that changes the world. One heart at a time. One family at a time. One patient moment at a time. And it all starts with a mother who refuses to give up. Even when giving up seems like the only option. So to every mother reading this. Every mother watching her child drift away. Every mother feeling invisible and powerless and heartbroken. I see you. I understand you. I am you. And I am here to tell you that it will be okay. Not because the pain will disappear, but because you are strong enough to carry it until the day it transforms into something beautiful. Into reconciliation. Into healing. Into a love story that started with silence and ended with strength. That is your story. And it is still being written. So keep going. Keep loving. Keep trusting. Because the ending is worth the wait. And you are exactly the mother your child needs. Even when they cannot see it yet. Stay strong. Stay silent when necessary. Stay loving always. The truth is coming. And when it does, you will be ready. Not with "I told you so," but with "I am here. I always have been. And I always will be." That is the love that wins. Every single time.